Welcome to the Right Take Podcast, news, ideas, and conversations at the intersection of politics and culture, a project of the David Horowitz Freedom Center. I will be your host, Mark Tapson. Greetings and welcome back to the Right Take Podcast. I am your host, Mark Tapson. President Trump recently gave a State of the Union address in which he ran through some of the extraordinary accomplishments and efforts of his new administration. The Democrat lawmakers who were present sat in morose, bitter disapproval, occasionally holding up little protest cards with lame little slogans on them. They also protested in other ways, some silent, some disruptive, but all childish and petulant. They fancy themselves to be a courageous resistance to fascism, but in fact they are totalitarians themselves who hate Trump with the heat of 1,000 suns because he inexplicably, to them, managed an epic political comeback to smash the Democrats' dream of eternal one-party hegemony. America is back, Trump stated at the outset of his address, and we are just getting started. He looked across at the Democrats' side of the chamber and said, I realize there's absolutely nothing I can say to make them happy or make them stand and smile or applaud. Which was true. They would not clap or stand in support of anything Trump said or presented, including when he fulfilled a cancer-stricken young black boy's dream by making him an honorary member of the Secret Service. This is the party that claims to be tolerant, compassionate, inclusive, and joyful. The reality that they demonstrate daily is that they are miserable excuses for human beings. The neo-Marxists who control the Democrat Party are bitter, hateful, anti-American globalists operating from a complete moral inversion of the rest of America. They are a pro-crime, anti-capitalist, pro-Hamas, anti-Semitic, pro-trans ideology, anti-science, pro-pagan, anti-Christian, racist, misogynistic death cult consumed by a lust for totalitarian power. Change my mind. And thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Coming up, my guest today is a delightful gentleman whom I'm proud to call a friend, a man who managed to survive a couple of decades in D.C. without losing his sanity and his integrity. He's got a lot to say about the State of the Union under President Trump and the direction of the Democrat Party. I'm sure more than we will be able to cover today. So stay with us here at the intersection of politics and culture because you do not want to miss this interview. And don't forget to subscribe to The Right Take so you don't miss any of the important conversations we are having here. And remember, if you like what you hear, please leave that positive review. Don't touch that dial. My guest today at the intersection of politics and culture is a distinguished attorney, former JAG officer in the Army. He's a former judge and now former congressman representing the great state of Texas's 1st Congressional District from 2005 to 2023. He is a great friend of the Horowitz Freedom Center and also happens to be sort of a neighbor of mine here in Texas. Louie Gohmert, welcome to the Right Take Podcast.
Thanks, Mark. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast with you, and it's great to just talk to you personally.
The feeling is mutual, and it's an honor to have you on. Thanks for taking the time. Louie, there's so much going on in the last couple of months that I don't even know where to begin with getting your take on all of it or even some of it, but let's just start with a big overarching question. What do you think of the Trump administration's absolute blitz of accomplishments in just the last 8 weeks?
Well, I think that it reflects his strategy that he came to over the last 4 years of not being in the presidency and have been so sorely mistreated by the people even that worked for him when he was president. He was not going to miss an opportunity if he was able to become president again. And so he came in with his plans, and he knew that if he had I started to use the term blitzkrieg, but that I don't want to use that word. But it just overwhelmed people with the number of things that he had going that they could try, but they were not going to be able to stop everything he was doing because there was just so much they were not ready for.
Is there any one thing in particular that he's done so far or attempted to do that has especially pleased you or maybe even surprised you?
Well, I've been pleased with so many of his choices for cabinet selections. As far as vice president, I didn't really know J.D. Vance. He got elected to the Senate and has an incredible story, life story. But I didn't really know him like I did so many of the senators. But, you just can't argue about his life story and his ability to hold his own against anybody. And he's just done an amazing job. And, he picked Matt Gaetz and to go into the Department of Justice. Well, what did they expect after the way that the DOJ had just been weaponized? And I mean, just absolutely brutally weaponized to try to destroy Donald Trump, destroy his family, destroy his business partners, destroy his friends. We've never seen anything like this in the whole history of the United States. And I mean the whole history, going back to Washington. And yet they came after this man. And I don't know anybody that could have withstood the kind of onslaught that he had, but he did. So it was like, oh yeah, well, how would you like to have Matt Gaetz, who you went after, come in and try to clean things up? Well, the reaction was rather visceral, but it didn't work out. But here came Pam Bondi, and I think maybe the original nomination or discussion of nominating Matt paved the way or made the way easier for Pam. And I think she's doing a good job. But you just go through Pete Hegseth, there was so much negativity over his appointment, but I liked it. No, he had not been a general, but you keep in mind, for our country's history, there had been real concern about having flag officers being those that are generals or admirals, just going from being generals and admirals right over into controlling the military. And that was not deemed to be a good idea. And we even put a law into effect that you had to wait 2 years before you could be in the military and then become Secretary of Defense. And of course, we got waivers, I think twice, to allow them to waive the 2-year rule. And I don't think that was a good idea. And if you go back to President Obama, he cleaned out the generals and admirals that weren't willing to go woke. I saw at one point he had gotten rid of around 197 and counting. 197. It's just incredible. If you weren't willing to go woke, then you were gone. And so I don't think it was a good idea to go to general. In fact, I had a 2-star general retired here in East Texas that I respect. He's a brilliant man. And he said, Louie, if you get to talk to President Trump, tell him he needs to fire everybody with a star on their shoulders. And so I think, you had Pete Hegseth, obviously very intelligent, had some baggage, but this is a good guy. So I was thrilled with that appointment. And I think Pete's doing a good job, and I think he will do a good job. And so I was thrilled with that appointment. And, Bobby Kennedy, I had a chance to talk to him when I was getting ready to guest host Sean Hannity's radio show one time. I wanted to have him on, but I wanted to talk to him before I had him on, and had a really delightful conversation with him, and I really liked the guy. We have lots of areas of disagreement, but I had gone into the conversation thinking he was just a total anti-vaccination, but he was just wanting people to use science, meaning you don't have vaccinations unless you can show that there's been a double-blind study and you know what the risks are and that there are more benefits than risks. And we didn't have that with so many of the vaccinations that were being used, even though people were making lots of money. So anyway, I could just go down. Sean Duffy at Transportation, worked with Sean in Congress, just a great guy. Kristi Noem at Homeland Security. I think she's already doing a great job, as is Lee Zeldin. Some of these people I'd worked with, Tulsi Gabbard, Director of National Intelligence. I think she was a great job. John Ratcliffe, CIA. He had been in intelligence before, I believe it was NSA. And so they were just, and Russ Vaught, Russ Vaught at OMB, that was a perfect position. Russ is just fabulous. So, there were just so many picks, and others, I don't know. Brooke Rollins at Ag, that would be a good fit, good Texas A&M lady. And so, I was pleased with so many. Others, I know they're great. I just don't know them as well. But I was very pleased, and so I thought that was great. But he had enough nominations that would make the left freak out and just start scurrying for, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Well, that was a good thing.
Yeah, I think he upset a lot of establishment Republicans too, because these choices seem to be really unorthodox. They weren't conventional experts or lifelong politicians. They were people who were unafraid to take a wrecking ball to the status quo, and I think that's what we really needed. After seeing some of Trump's appointments during his first term, I was concerned this time around that he might need some better judgment about the people he surrounds himself with, but it just seems like he learned a big lesson from his first term.
Mark, you're very right about his first term, but when he came in, he had people around him that had helped him, not initially, but had helped him get elected, that started telling him, you hire this person and this person. And the first time I was invited to the Oval Office, my chief of staff had called his scheduler and said, hey, Congressman Gohmert's been invited over. What does the president want to talk about? So Congressman Gohmert can get prepared. Said he just wants to talk to him. And so I go over and he asked, well, how do you think things are going? I said, well, I think things are going well, but you got a lot of people working even right here in the White House and across the street here in the old executive office building that don't like you. And they're hiring people that don't like you. Really? Yeah. And he wanted names, and I gave him some names. And anyway, yeah, so that was the beginning of a good relationship. But he didn't know because, and this was my thinking, Mark, when he was as a private businessman, he had a reputation. You screw him around, then he was going to sue you. And he was litigious. If you messed him around or he perceived you messed him around, he was coming after you. He was rather bold about it. And so people were a little leery in private business of messing around Trump. He had the money and the wherewithal. He was coming after you. So he gets to Washington, and this is just my take. I think he thought, well, people are going to be a little leery of messing him around. He had no idea how devious these people were. And I tell you, Mark, having been on the bench for a decade, a felony judge, I thought I'd gotten pretty good, not great, but pretty good at noticing tells when people were lying and picking up on things and judging, because you have to do that as a judge. People testify in front of you. Uh, but I got to Washington, I'm going, holy cow. These people are just incredible liars. They can look in the eye and make you feel so good about yourself, and then you find out they lied to you about every single thing they said. And I don't think President Trump was prepared for people to surround him and just overwhelm him with compliments and want to help him all the while they were stabbing him in the back. It was just, I can tell you, it was a shock to him. Some of the people that to his face were so gracious and oh yes sir, and then behind his back were, oh, we're going to mess him over and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I think he learned a lot from that.
Has he made any missteps in your views so far? Any decisions he's made maybe that you would have advised him against?
I don't know. Well, there are a few appointments. Like I say, I don't know them well enough to know for sure, but those things will play out. Um, I like the. I didn't know he was going to invite Elon Musk to uh, create Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency. I like the idea. Um, I was hoping that we would have people in Congress that were going to pave the way for him coming in and have legislation prepared that were going to make it easier to fire people that were political appointees, people that were civil servants that weren't doing their job, that were in parts of the government that were deemed unnecessary. But that didn't happen. So that's not on President Trump. That's on Congress. We should have paved the way and gotten that ready for him, or at least had it ready to be filed and passed come January before he even took office. But I believe that's in the works and coming. But that would have made it so much easier for him because, as you know, there's a lot of litigation going on right now trying to stop the things that Elon Musk is doing and President Trump has been doing, just trying to get rid of the unnecessary government. And that's not a mistake on his part. It's just that the lawfare is being used again, and he knew it was coming. He knew that would be happening, but so at this point, I can't really say I see something I'm cringing about that he's done. Uh, we've got developments in Israel that were not of his doing. In fact, you go back to, October 7th of 2023, Biden was in office, and as an old history major, I've never stopped reading history, studying it, but it is the rather history adage that um, a country's enemy is provoked to action when that country's strongest ally distances itself. And people were seeing the United States under Biden distance itself from Israel. Well, that's provocative to Israel's enemies. So you were seeing all kinds of action take place. And that was, I think, preparatory to October 7th. But if you want to go back to the real preparatory action for that, it was back in 2005. I like President George W. Bush. He is a really likable guy. If you get to know him, you talk to him. But his administration was thinking, gee, let's try to get Israel to do a unilateral act that is just so unilateral that it will show the whole world that Israel really does want peace. If they just do this act, and that would be to give over Gaza, that was controlled by Israel, that was full of businesses, some manufacturing, lots of greenhouses, lots of Israelis, they were in control of it. Let's just run the Israelis out and let Palestinians have it. What a magnanimous act that would be, and the whole world will see. We're not getting anything for that. The world will see, look, we are the ones that really want peace. They got talked into doing that. Now, Netanyahu was not prime minister, but that act of giving away land, trying to buy peace, trying to buy favor, did not buy them peace, and it did not buy favor, but it bought what happened on October 7th, because Israel's enemies are always looking for ways to attack it. And that gave them that way. And General al-Sisi, one time when I was talking to him over in Cairo, he said after they took over and got rid of the Muslim Brother leader Morsi, who had been trying to convert Egypt into a caliphate, he said they started trying to clean up the Sinai, and they found more weapons per person in the Sinai probably than any place in the world. Well, we know that a lot of the weapons that were going into Sinai were being smuggled through tunnels from Sinai into Gaza. Some were going from Egypt into Gaza, but that, those were mistakes that cost Israel, and it cost the United States some of our prestige, that we would let those kind of things happen, and in fact encourage them by encouraging Israel to give up land, trying to buy peace when they got nothing in return for it. So Trump is trying to clean that mess up, and God bless him for doing so. We just can't afford to be part of demanding a two-state solution. That's never going to be a solution. A two-state solution in Israel really is a final solution, because that allows, just like giving Gaza over to the Palestinians, that will allow them to have another staging area from which to attack and wipe them out. So I think Trump's trying to do the right thing there as well.
Yeah, a lot of, let's call them America firsters, myself among them, don't really want America going to war over Ukraine, but they also a lot of them don't seem to want us funding Israel either, or getting involved in assisting Israel. To what extent should we be helping Israel to handle their enemies, Hamas and Iran?
I like President Trump's approach. We'll give you the weapons you need, because Iran is a threat to the whole Western world. They are. We are the great Satan to Iran. And of course, you trace those, where that came from. It came from great President Jimmy Carter. He and his CIA thought it would be a good idea to help get rid of the Shah of Iran. The Shah of Iran was not a nice man from what we read and learn, but they did not look at the consequences of toppling him without a better plan. Well, their plan was bring in the Ayatollah Khomeini, and Carter even welcomed him as a man of peace. And, the State Department and the CIA thought that he probably wouldn't last very long, that his administration, Ayatollah, wouldn't be there more than a couple of years. But they helped orchestrate that thing. and get rid of the Shah. The Shah was looking for a little help, and they didn't provide it, and he fell, and in came the Ayatollah Khomeini. So imagine Carter and his administration surprise when the Ayatollah Khomeini ends up starting the biggest supporting regime of terrorism in the world. And that's what they are today. So that's how they arrived there. They would be nowhere near a nuke if it weren't for the Obama administration. Well, some want to quibble over whether they provided the money or whether they just actually cut loose some of Iran's own money. They sent, $150 billion in pallets over there. And that money got spent for terror, at least a bunch of it spent for terrorism. And they were working on nukes. And by the way, Mark, there were a few of us that went to Vienna after that horrendous Iran treaty. And I know it was called an agreement so that it didn't require two-thirds confirmation, but it was a treaty because it changed the terms of other treaties. It was just ridiculous what the Senate did with that. It never was actually confirmed the way it should have been. But there were International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, were to have inspectors inspect their sites to make sure that they were not enriching uranium, that kind of thing. And so a few of us met with those two top inspectors in Vienna. We want to know because we got the impression they weren't inspecting all of the most important places, the military locations deep under the mountains, and sure enough, they weren't. They said, well, you just turned in a report saying that there is no evidence whatsoever that Iran is violating the Iran agreement and that they're enriching uranium. How can you say that? You just admitted to us you didn't go into these military operations, which are the places they're most likely enriching uranium. And, Mark, what their answer was, well, Iran said it was really sensitive areas, so they just gave us videos of those areas. And we saw from the videos they were not enriching uranium. Can you believe that? That's what they said. So anyway, that's why we're in the trouble we are, and why Israel will likely have to do something about their potential for having nuclear weapons. The Obama administration put them in a situation where they could have nukes, and they're threatened. They've threatened we're going to nuke places, and we can't let that happen. We can't let them have nukes. We can't let them use nukes. The world will be just a bad place to live in if that happens.
Speaking of Trump appointments and Israel, what do you think about Mike Huckabee as his choice for ambassador to Israel? I think that's a great pick. What do you think?
I think it was a great pick too. I like Mike so very much, and he's just a wonderful guy. Yeah, I thought that was a great pick, and talking to people from Israel, I think they were very, very pleased with that selection too. Good pick.
To jump back to Ukraine, which I brought up a moment ago, what is your take on this controversy over the White House meeting with Ukrainian President Zelensky? Do you think that Trump and Vance showed an America First strength, or was it a diplomatic disaster?
Yeah, I know a lot of people think that Vance and Trump were not diplomatic enough, but I thought it was rather outrageous of President Zelensky to come in acting like that. But he I go back to when he came into the joint session of Congress. And look, I know it's a small thing, but when you're begging for money, you really ought to observe another country's rules. Uh, I could not go on the floor. I had another member of Congress tell me that, and he was being serious. He said, "Louie, you got a white mark. You must have leaned up against something on the back of my suit coat." So I took it off. I was at the back of the House floor, and I was rubbing out that white mark. The sergeant at arms came rushing back there. "You got to get off the House floor." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "No gentleman may be on the House floor unless he's wearing a jacket. You have to be on the floor." And that's the rules. That's the way it's been. In fact, Barney Frank came on the House floor, and he had had surgery, and his arm was in a cast, and he had the metal thing going down to his chest, holding it out. So he came in shirt sleeves, and so I went over to the sergeant at arms. I said, "Do you remember Sergeant at Arms telling me there are no exceptions? You gentlemen cannot come onto the floor. No gentleman without a coat." And I looked at Barney and pointed to him, kind of nodded my head his direction, and he just kind of ducked his head because he knew he had to go over and speak to Barney. And so I moved out of the area, and I saw him go over to Barney. Barney was yelling and fussing, and finally he stormed off the floor and came back with a suit coat draped off of one shoulder because he could not get it over the other. But those were the rules. And Zelensky comes in a sweatshirt, like he had just been in battle. Well, we've had presidents of other countries come to ours whose countries were in battle. Our president had come to the House floor when we were in battle. And they didn't come in sweatshirts. It's a matter of respect. And that may be a small thing, and it is a small thing, but it's just, knowing he was a comedian, actor, okay, put that aside. Show a little respect, especially when you're coming begging for money. And then to come on the floor, and I know these were not the exact words, but in essence, he was saying to us there on the House floor, you want to know that your money's being spent well, you can trust us, the money's being well spent. Well, that was not very encouraging because Ukraine was known for its corruption. And so anyway, for him to come in and be acting like that, and look, one of the things they're upset about is if there's going to be peace, they want Crimea back. Well, I think they ought to have Crimea back, but that ship sailed a long time ago during the Obama administration. Crimea, in my mind, it ought to always be part of Ukraine. But the problem was that you had you have to go back to President Bush. When he was in office, Russia invaded the country of Georgia. It was outrageous. It was unprovoked. Putin just invaded it. He wanted the old Soviet Union back. He just invaded Georgia. And at least President Bush took some stern financial measures. He censored some folks, and I think he blacklisted folks and may have seized some money, but it infuriated Putin that he took the actions he did. So when Obama took office, he wanted to let Putin know, look, we think Bush overreacted when you invaded Georgia. So he sends Clinton over with this little plastic red button. They wanted to mutually push the plastic red button, which they had the name reset in Russian, which wasn't, they had the wrong name in Russian. Never mind that. I was rather incompetent, but they, and Secretary Clinton made clear, we think, the administration past overreacted, meaning when you invaded Georgia, we're not going to overreact in the future. We want a reset of our relation. Well, if you're Putin, how do you take that? You take that to mean if I invade Ukraine, you're not going to overreact. And so that's exactly how he took it. So he invades Ukraine and he goes after Crimea, which he's wanted all along. So that set that up. And so he took he took Crimea. And Russia had, for decades, had been sending Russian citizens and Russian-speaking people into eastern Ukraine so they could someday claim, see, this is all Russian. These are Russian people. So they've been setting that up. So I would love for Crimea to be part of Ukraine again, but that was 11 years ago that happened under Obama. And I don't see how you make that happen and go back again. I think that's done for now. I think it would take a massive world war to bring that back around. I think that ship sailed. So I think Trump is doing the right thing, and for Zelensky to throw a little hissy fit there in the Oval Office was entirely inappropriate, undiplomatic, and unhelpful to what he was doing. Coming in and begging for money. And President Trump was exactly right. He was begging for help back during the Obama administration, and they sent him blankets, sheets and blankets. And then when Trump came in, he sent them javelins so that they could knock out Russian tanks. Without the javelins, he would have been in real trouble, just like Trump said. So I don't think he handled that well at all, but he doesn't like the idea of having a peace agreement where he doesn't walk away with getting Crimea back. He wants to fight over it. That can't happen. That's not going to happen, and it's very unfortunate.
Yeah, as you know, Trump is constantly being accused of being a puppet of Russian President Putin, and that we should be defending democracy around the world. Do you think that Trump's approach of deal making and trying to bring this conflict to an end through negotiations, do you think that's a better way to defend democracy than simply promoting or pushing toward World War III?
Mark, I've struggled with that. I had some great history professors in college. One of my favorites, Dr. Underberger, she was terrific on Russian history. Anyway, I've struggled with that. I know and I believe Reagan, peace through strength. I believe that weakness is provocative. It is. You have to have strength. And as I've traveled around the world with other members of Congress, meeting with the legislators of countries in all parts of the world, they were getting scared when they would see how weak we were getting and how weak our military was getting during, from 08, 09, during the Obama years, we were getting much weaker. And all through those 8 years, they were glad to see we're looking a little stronger during the Trump years. But then during the Biden years, they were really getting scared. But weakness is provocative. And they were saying things like, we're getting scared because of your perceived weakness. And, if you lose your freedom in America, there will be no place in the world that anybody can go. We got pockets of freedom around the world, but they won't be able to keep it unless you keep yours. So one thing I was convinced of for sure, Mark, is that you did have to have and a strong, free country in the world that could protect itself. And if you didn't have that, then there would be no place in the world to be free. And I think that's where America First comes in. And it's the metaphor has been used many times, but like on an airplane, if the mask drops down, you have to put your mask on first before you start helping anybody else, because otherwise you're helping somebody else and pass out. You're no good, and everybody else you're trying to help dies. So uh, we got to strengthen ourselves first, and we have gotten weak. Our military forgotten what it was supposed to be for, and the wokeness. The place for social experimentation has never been in the military. Totally inappropriate. Rush Limbaugh, bless him, he used to talk about the military's supposed to kill people and break things, and when we call them out, that's what they got to do. And that's not what they were being used for. They were being used for social experimentation. So the one thing I know is you got to have a strong military, and they've got to be powerful enough to go in and hit. And so let me just say this in furtherance of that, Mark, regarding Afghanistan, longest war we've ever had. It didn't need to be. The war in Afghanistan was won by the end of February of 2002. People don't remember that. They don't realize that. It was a brilliant strategy, Mark. We had about 300 special operators that we embedded with Afghanistan. These were, they called them Northern Alliance. These were a lot of Afghan Muslims that did not want radical Islamists controlling their country. They didn't want the Taliban in charge. They hated the Taliban. And so we got a bunch of them. We provided them weapons, and we had our own operators were the ones that had the satellite phones. We had B-52 planes flying above with bombs, and only our special operators could call down the bombs. They had the coordinates to do that. There was a book, Horse Soldiers, and a movie, 12 Strong, I think it was. Uh, it was pretty good, not totally accurate because only General Dustin was allowed to lead attacks, not our guys. But there was no organized Taliban by the end of February of '02. We won the war. And then here's where we made a mistake, in my opinion, Mark. We won the war, and I think that was a good thing to do because they were behind us being hit on 9/11. We asked the question, okay, now what kind of government do we give them? That's where I think we violate the America First. And the debate was held, and I've talked to a couple of guys that were part of the inner circle. And I'm going, why didn't you just say, look, let them have a federalist system? You got a tribal country. There would never been a better place for a federalist system where the provinces, like our states, would be in charge. And they said, well, that's what some of us argued, but the line that controlled, and this was pushed by a guy named Khalilzad, Afghan American, and he's the one that helped Pompeo, and he would push this idea. No, you don't want to deal with a bunch of yahoo governors. Just put all the power in the president. So the president, under the Constitution we gave them, president appointed all the governors, all the mayors, all the police chiefs. He had total control, which was ripe for corruption, and that's exactly what they got. And so that's what created the situation where the Taliban could come back in because the provinces were not allowed to have militia where they could fight them off. And so when we withdrew, boom, here came the Taliban. just like the friend. I met with the Northern Alliance a number of times, and they were so scared because they said, "Look, we fought with you. We had relatives die for you, and you're going to leave us to die in your wake. You can't just leave it to the Taliban." But that's what Mike Pompeo was negotiating, and it's what Biden did, and it was terrible. So, a long way to say, I think you can have the America first and defeat your enemy, but don't feel like you have to just set up every government in the world. Like, yeah, help them do what's best, but then let them do their thing and make it clear, if you hit us, we're going to come back and wipe you out again. That makes sense.
It makes perfect sense to me. Let me switch gears here for a moment, because I want to make sure that I don't forget to ask you about this. The Democrat Party seems to have been really rocked on its heels, not only in the last election, but also by Trump's whirlwind first couple of months so far. Some of them are even admitting to themselves that they're in trouble. Do you think that Democrats are going to wake up and start moving back to the center, or are they just going to double down on radicalism?
I think there's too many that are in too high positions in the Democratic Party to back off of their positions on whether you want to call it progressivism, socialism, Marxism. And as a guy that you and I love and revere, David Horowitz, knows better than anyone, these people are in charge now in the Democratic Party, and they are not going to go away. They're not going to go gently into that good night. They're in charge, and they will do whatever it takes to whip people back in line. I don't think they're going to give up power. They have been able to radicalize too many elements of American society and create too much in the way of culture wars in the U.S. I don't think. What I'm curious. What do you think, Mark? I don't think they're going away.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think they're just kind of regrouping for the moment, and they're going to get their resistance act together. But I think you're completely right that the far left controls the Democrat Party, and they're not going to give that up lightly. Along the lines of the culture war, it looks like the Department of Education is about to get scrapped. Do you think that's long overdue?
Oh, yeah, I do. I don't think it should have ever been formed, and for a number of reasons. If you look at students' testing results on national testing, like the SAT, it went down for years. And in fact, back in the 90s, when I was involved with former students, I was on the board of the Former Student Association at Texas A&M. I knew our president of Texas A&M was involved with the SAT stuff, and I said, "Hey, I just read where the SAT was downgrading the scoring," and I said, "What's that all about?" And he said, "Well, scores have been going down for years now on the SAT, and so people are tired of education getting beat up over not educating our students as well, and students being dumbed down. So a majority think a solution would be, well, let's raise the scores superficially." And I said, "So how many points are they raising the scores?" And he said, "Well, they're doing it with a formula." But he said, "Your score on the SAT back in 1971, basically you add 200 points to it, and it'd be what it'll be under this new scoring system." So that gave you some idea. When the Department of Education came in 79, within 15 years, there was so much damage done to education, they were already needing to change the SAT. Now, in the early 2000s, I was looking at the website of a local independent school district here in Tyler, Texas, and I saw a statement that concerned me. It said, We proudly say half of all of our employees are teachers. And I thought, half? Only half are teachers? That doesn't seem like enough. And so I had my staff get with the Texas Education Agency going back to 1979, right at the start of the Department of Education. And at that time, right at 3/4 of all employees of kindergarten to 12th grade were teachers. And that sounded about right. Okay, about 3/4. And then you look over those years, those numbers kept going down, which makes sense. If you have a federal bureaucracy controlling education, well, they're going to keep dictating stuff and making requirements for the state capitals. And then those education agencies at the state capitals, they had to hire more people to fulfill those. Then they had to force administrators to be hired in every school district to fulfill and gather up that information, be sent to the state. And it's also that if you want your money coming from Washington that you have sent up here, you only get your money sent back after we took a big hunk out of it if you do all the things we say. Well, eliminate the Department of Education, and I had a bill that would do that. Thomas Massey just scrapped it, but my bill said you eliminate the Department of Education and you sent back pro rata the full amount from each state that each state was sending to Washington to cover the full budget of the Department of Education, because the schools need that money that had been going from their state to Washington. So I think it's high time that it went back. We've been dumbing down kids for too long. And another example of what federal control could do, when I was a district judge, we had a juvenile board that was over the juvenile facility for people that were, juvenile delinquents that were detained. And we kept getting more and more requirements in order to get the dollar that the federal government provided. They kept requiring more and more things to get that dollar that the federal government would give us for each meal for the delinquents. And finally, one of the judges on the board said, would you do a study of how much it would cost us to serve each meal if we don't take the dollar grant from the federal government and we just provide our own meals and we make sure that they have every bit as much of the nutritional requirements as the meals we're doing. And so they had surveys. What would the kids want to eat? They let them pick from all these things. They made sure they had all the nutritions. And they came back and they said, well, it turns out we save $2 for every $1 we don't take from the federal government because of all the requirements, and we only have about half as much garbage to throw away. So that's kind of where it goes with the federal requirements. That's not just a great panacea when the federal government gets involved in local things.
Yeah, I would love to see the Department of Education gone, and of course getting critical race theory and gender ideology indoctrination out of our schools. That would be a huge step forward too.
Yep, no place for them.
Louie, you need to get a memoir out there. Are you contemplating, or would you contemplate a book about your life and times? Because I think that would be a great read.
Well, actually, I have got a book about finished, and actually I provided a bunch of it to David Horowitz to give me advice, and he has given me advice. And anyway, bless him, he's one of the smartest people I've ever known. But he's not able to do as much as he has. But no, I'm about finished, and I've got an agent, and he said there's publishers interested in publishing it, so we'll see.
Oh, that's great to hear.
But actually, the title I was thinking about is How We Got Here, because so many people have said, I just can't believe how we've gotten here. How we've gotten here. Well, I've watched it happen over my lifetime, and so those are stories I tell, and a lot of them from behind the scenes in Congress. How good people got talked into doing things that were not helpful to the country.
Wow, I would really look forward to reading that. I know you're retired now, but are you active much on social media, or is there some other way that people can keep up with your take on the issues of the day?
Mark, I have not been. When I had staff, I started out, I was doing a lot of Twitter. Back then it was called Twitter, not X. But then, I have a pretty quick wit, I've been told. But sometimes that can get you in trouble if you see a double entendre and you say it and you think it's funny. But it turns out there's three meanings to a word or phrase, and the third one is cataclysmic, and you didn't see that coming. And then you have to go about, oh, no, I didn't mean that. That was not. So I had an agreement with my chief of staff and communications. Okay, I'll send you cute little tweets that I think should go, and if you don't see a problem, then you send it out. So I quit doing social media, let them do all of that. And since I left Congress, I haven't had communications director doing all that stuff for me. So I haven't been as active, but I do still have www.gohmert.com, but I have not kept that as active as I should have. But we'll see. I'm going to be jumping back in, I think.
Good to hear. Congressman Louie Gohmert, thanks again for joining us today. Just too much to talk about. We'll have to have you back again.
I'd love to. And I do have, at gohmert.com. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Louie. And listeners, thank you for joining us. And don't forget to subscribe to The Right Take so that you don't miss any of the important conversations we're having here. And remember, if you like what you hear, please leave a positive review. Thank you, and see you next time. The Right Take with Mark Tapson is a project of the David Horowitz Freedom Center and Front Page Magazine. Unauthorized reproduction of this podcast without express written consent is prohibited.